Welcome back to another edition of Talking Ball. It's Jack. We've got JD here, and we're looking at the Duke versus Georgia Tech preview. As this game will be Saturday at noon, tip-off. Duke will be on the road taking on Georgia Tech, and it should be a good game. Despite the record of Georgia Tech coming into this one, they are 5-6 on the season. They are 0-1 in the ACC. They've lost 3 of their past 4. So all of that says it probably shouldn't be a good game. But Georgia Tech has just had a number of injuries. They haven't been able to find continuity. Only 3 guys have played in all 11 games this season for Georgia Tech. And I feel like just a little bit, they've started to find a little bit of continuity, sort of, because they're still going to be out at least 1, maybe 2 of their rotation players for this game versus Duke. But before we get into some of the details of this game, where do you want to kick us off from, JD?
Well, I just want to agree with you that they should be better than they are. 247 had them as the 13th ranked recruiting class for this year. And this is Damon Stoudemire, Coach Stoudemire's second year there. And he had a really good recruiting class. And so it is surprising that they have the start that they did, which means there's a couple of games there against Southeast, West, North, Louisiana State, whatever, those kind of games where you're expecting to bolster your record so that it's in better shape for, when they're doing Selection Sunday. But the 5-6 start going into ACC play is probably not where Damon wanted them to be.
Certainly not. Certainly not. And speaking of Coach Stoudemire, in his second season at the helm for Georgia Tech, and it's been a weird run. I don't know how else to put it other than that. And the reason why is because, to your point, they certainly, I don't know about they, but I'll raise my hand, thought they would be much better this year than their 5-6 start. They were 14-18 last year, but also had wins over Duke, North Carolina, Clemson, and Wake Forest, arguably at least the 3 best teams in the ACC, arguably 4 of the top 5 or 4 of the top 6 teams in the ACC last year, and that was with a sub 500 record. So it's just kind of hard to put a finger on where this team is, because they have a lot of talented pieces, as you alluded to. They have older guys, they've got some younger guys, they've got some guys who are now with Coach Stoudemire for a second season, but they just, due to injuries, I would say mostly this year, they haven't been able to get on the same page and have, consistency with their rotation and starting lineup, which I think will allow them to, play better. And, if you're a Georgia Tech fan, the hope is that this team starts to improve, and then maybe kind of like what happened with NC State last year, because as you said, it's going to be tough now based off how they started the season, but maybe they can get hot in the ACC tournament and steal a bid or get an at-large bid on the bubble if all things break right. Because the ACC, there's going to be a lot of winnable games. No one's outside of Duke and Clemson right now. Maybe North Carolina. Everyone else is kind of in a similar group. So there should be opportunities for Georgia Tech.
I think they've had 1 invite to the big dance in the last 14 years.
Wow.
In which case, clearly that's a goal. They didn't get there last year, so that's a goal for Coach Stoudemire. The funny thing about Coach Stoudemire, one of the jokes about it is he 5'7"? Is he 5'10"? Is he 5'8"? Is he 5? He never gives the same height twice in an interview. And he himself, when he played at Arizona, was just a phenomenal. Took him to the Final Four. Just phenomenal. And the glory days of Georgia Tech, going all the way back to Bobby Cremins as the coach, they had this pipeline to New York City to the great guards, Stephen Marbury, Kenny Anderson, coming from Brooklyn, coming from Queens. And David would have been just a great coach for those guys, being able to communicate with them. But now he's got this new crew. So, Jack, why don't you take us through the team?
Yeah. So it starts to me with Nate George and Bai Dango. And the reason why is those two guys have been with and playing the past 2 years with Coach Stoudemire. Nate George, he's their point guard. He has been their point guard for the last 2 seasons. He's a pretty big guard. He is listed at 6'3", so not quite as big as some of the Duke guards, but he still has size at the position. And he's their leading assist guy, one of the leading assist guys in the conference at 6 assists per game. And Bayan Dango, Duke fans should certainly remember him from last year. He gave, especially in the first game, and he played well in the second game as well. But he gave Kyle Filipowski everything he could handle and more. He is a tough cover. He's 6'9". He plays as both the power forward and at times when they shift smaller, the 5 for Georgia Tech. And when he's aggressive, he is just really tough to guard. And it will be more than interesting. It will be important for Cooper Flagg to stay out of foul trouble guarding Dango in this game versus Georgia Tech. Now, they've had 10 guys who I would say have been a part of the rotation depending on injuries. So those are the first two. The third guy is Lance Terry, who's their leading scorer, 15 points per game. He can really shoot it. He's their leading three-point shooter, 40% on the season, rather. And he also is pretty explosive. There's been some big dunks that he's had in recent games. And speaking of explosive, as JD alluded to earlier, they had a highly ranked recruiting class led by Jaden Mustaf, who's a very athletic wing, standing about 6'6". He can really get downhill. The shooting isn't great, but it has improved as he started to get more and more playing time, and so has his scoring, as he's been getting 15 or more points in each of the last handful of games. He's been really important for them as an aggressive downhill driver. And one of the keys for this game is who is going to guard Jaden Mustaf, as well as who's going to guard, Nate George and Lance Terry. Now, this is where things get interesting because outside of those 4 guys, I'm not sure who Coach Stoudemire is going to have and who he's going to start. So now I'm just going to get into some of the other guys on the roster. Namely, starting off with Javion McCollum, who is a point guard transferred in from Oklahoma. He started off the year sharing the backcourt with, Nate George, and then he got injured and has been coming off the bench since then. I am curious if that will continue as he'll be in his 3rd game back. He can get downhill and find his teammates, and has been shooting the 3 ball decently well this season. There's also Luke O'Brien, who is a part of the Colorado team last season that was pretty good. He was in that starting lineup, but he was certainly a part of the rotation, a key player for Colorado, and hasn't shot the 3 as well as expected. But I'll go out on a limb and say he'll shoot the ball well Saturday. And then Duncan Powell, he's kind of like a glue guy, an energy guy, comes in, rebounds, gives them life, can play some defense and pass. Not much of a shooter, but can score around the rim. Ryan Mutombo has gotten some minutes the past 2 games. He didn't play the first 9 games. Not exactly sure why that is, but he is 7'2", so it will be interesting to see him go up against our big guy, Kama Maluach. And lastly, speaking of guys who are going to be out of the rotation, I alluded to it earlier, Kawasi Reeves was a starter for them the first handful of games. He's been out since then. They say he won't be back until January. He has an ankle injury. And Dorian Onwuchekwa started, again, handful of games for them at center, only played 8 minutes in their second to last game against Northwestern, and then was not available due to personal reasons for the last game versus UMBC. So not sure if he will be available for this one for the Yellow Jackets.
One of the things I saw when I was looking over the stats for the team is that the starters, the guys that are scoring the most, also are very good free throw shooters. They're in the 80% range. And I thought as a team, they didn't shoot the three ball all that impressively. It was like 32% when I was looking at it. So, what does that mean to me? They got to get to the basket because if they can get fouled, they could shoot. They shoot really well from the free throw line. So I'm looking for them trying to get to the line at least 30% of the time. Not 30% of the time, at least 30 to 40 free throws. So I expect them not to be hoisting 3-pointers, but instead trying to take the ball to the basket and hope to draw the foul.
Yeah, and as usual with pretty much any team, the answer is it depends, and it depends on who, right? Because Lance Terry, he's by far their best 3-point shooter. As I said, 40%. He shoots a good amount of them per game, 6 attempts per game. But to your point, their next best 3-point shooter is Javion McCollum, who's pretty solid, 37%. But after him, you have Nate George, who's at 33% on 5 attempts. And besides that, no one else on the team is really shooting well. However, like I alluded to before, Luke O'Brien is a good shooter that seems to be underperforming. And there's I think as Duke fans, we can certainly relate to that. And there's certainly room for him to regress and shoot a little bit better. To your point, though, between Jaden Mustaf and Baye Ndango, those two guys are going to be attacking the basket. And we'll be looking to draw fouls. And as we know, college basketball, let's just say this, college basketball refs can be influenced by the environment they are in. And we benefit from it when games are at Cameron, for sure. And the opposite is certainly true in road games. And so, again, I will emphasize Cooper Flagg foul trouble will be something to watch. It's going to be very important for Duke in this game, especially because Baye Ndango is a very tough cover at 6'9", and assuming that Duke plays Malik Brown only at center, if Cooper Flagg's not in the game, they don't really have somebody who can match up with Dango, because while, for example, Sion James is strong and certainly has the strength to deal with Dango, he will be giving up 4 inches or so in that matchup. So I think Cooper Flagg versus Baye Ndango is one of the keys of the game.
Well, and as always, here are my 3 keys to what I think Duke needs to do. So we can all remember back to the George Mason game when the first half we shot 9 for 33. I think we didn't, the first segment, I know, you've been a fan of the show. We talk about it all the time. The first segment looked good. We got 2 threes. We got a 2. We're up 8-3. But for the overall half, it was ugly. And the question is, who is going to change that that storyline? So I am actually looking for K2. It's time. He's getting the shots. They're clanking off the back of the rim. I think K2, it's time for him to have a game where he's going to get 5 3-pointers, 5 out of 8. And he's going to break out. Because other than his shooting, and I don't want to get down on him because of just his shooting, because the rest of his game is just terrific. And that brings me to something that we talked about, the microwave. Isaiah Evans. he's got to get more minutes because it seems as if he is ready to shoot. And, last game, he had 3 3-pointers. We all remember the Auburn game where he 6 of 8, just insanity what he did in the first half. So, better shooting on offense. There's nothing to say about our defense. How many teams now have we held under 50 points?
4.
So 47 points. It was how many George Mason scored for the game. So there's not much to say about our defense, and our offense is really actually statistically good, but I think we keep waiting for it to go to where it could be. And that it's going to happen. The question is always, which guy is it? And that is, who's got the hot hand? How do you know? Isaiah Evans, K2, Coop was looking for it from 3-point range. But now that we're in ACC play, the rotation might get tighter. Although it looks like it's a 9-man rotation.
Yeah, the only reason, typically, you're right, but this year was a little bit different because of the number of high-profile games that Duke played early on, as opposed to, in previous years there maybe be half as many of those games. And with that being said, I think we got the conference rotation just a month or so earlier in the season. So to your point, Isaiah Evans, I think he's just got to keep getting more minutes. And my favorite stat on Isaiah Evans right now is Tyrese Proctor gets up the most threes for this Duke team. He shoots 6.2 3-pointers per game. He plays just over 29 minutes per game. Isaiah Evans is shooting 5 3-pointers per game in only 13 minutes on average. It is just crazy how ready to shoot he is. And the other part is right now, you can certainly, it feels like you can see it with Con Knipple and maybe some other guys as well, but certainly with Con, where they feel the pressure of being in a little bit of a shooting slump. And right now, Isaiah Evans, I don't know if he has a conscience. Like, he just comes in and he's just like, looks like a good shot to me. And that's the part that I think this Duke team really needs, that, because everyone else can kind of get very rigid and kind of like stuck offensively. And Isaiah Evans is just ready to go. And I think, like, right now, I don't know what the exact number is, but they put up a graphic in the last game that like somewhere around 85 to 90% of his shots are from 3. I think if he gets more playing time, because we've seen it, he had a really big dunk like 3 or 4 games ago off of a pass from Cooper Flagg. I think he'll start to get more drives to the basket as he gets more comfortable, because right now he's only getting out there for 10 to 15 minutes, so he doesn't have a ton of time to really, work his way into the game. So he just does what he's best at, and he's damn good at it. And so I think the more Duke can get him involved offensively, the better the offense will be. But as we know, the only way that's going to happen is if Isaiah Evans continues to earn minutes on the defensive end of the court, because that is very clearly what Jon Scheyer prioritizes for this team.
I'm the kind of guy that goes into a candy store and says, I got this, but I want more. And that is one of the things about this Duke team. Darren Harris. How can we get him a couple of minutes? I would love for him to be able to, and not just like at the end of the game. I'd like in ACC play where we should do very well. We've been talking about this, that we go into every Duke game in the ACC with expecting to win. Even though this game is in Atlanta, we expect to win the game. And that Duke has a very strange position when they're they're a team that could be a national champion. They're a team that has, on any given night, the ability to put up 90 points, and yet they frustrate us sometimes with their shooting. And Coach Shire says, I got to get even looser in their offense when I'm saying, can we have some set plays?
Quick clarification on that. He's not saying that we have to get looser in terms of play calling, because he's been very upfront about how he calls games, which is basically he does it for the most part. He has a few set plays off of timeouts, start the game, etc. When he says that, he's saying that the players have to play with a little bit more carefree energy as opposed to feeling all tense and tight and I got to hit the next shot, blah, blah, blah. That's where that statement comes from, more so than the play calling versus non-play calling.
Look, you have a team there that he's showed now that he's willing to use 9 players. He could use 10, and he could use Patrick as an 11th player. We saw little glimpses where when Patrick's in the game, first couple of minutes he needs to get settled, and then actually not bad. He actually has 11 different candies to choose from. And in the course of the ACC, where the division this year is weaker than in other years, it's not every night that you're going out against a top 20 team. He has a chance to experiment a bit more and get minutes for other players. I don't know that it's absolutely necessary. When you go in the tournament, you're going to be pretty set on your 8-man rotation. But it sure seems at times that the offense is stuck. Maybe your explanation of what Coach Shire is thinking, that they're a little too tense, that maybe they know that if they miss, there's somebody else who can come in. And, that is like, I got to hit the shot. But, look, I expect a win. I expect a win by, 10 to 15 points. But on any given day, that win could grow. I mean, their defense is locked down. It is, and especially when Malik Brown is in the middle, there is no pass. There's nothing that the other team can do that's safe. I don't know if there's no category where maybe there is. Maybe there is such a thing where you could see, like, who leads the NCAA men's basketball in deflections. And there's the top 10.
I'm sure there's an analytics platform or website that we could pay for to get that. But I want to go back to your analogy, the candy store analogy, because I'm going to take it the opposite way, quite frankly. And while you said we could, go from a 9-man rotation to 10 or 11, I think not so much in this game, but as you said, in some of the bigger games, and once we get to the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament, I think it's going to be an 8-man rotation. Maybe it still stays at 9, but we'll see. And I'm going to say, when I'm in the candy store, I just want to have my favorite candies. I don't want to have my 9th, 10th, and 11th, favorite candy. I want to have triple, quadruple of the chocolate covered pretzels, and that's just kind of how I'm looking at it, because if we're getting 9, 10, and 11 in some of the bigger games, that means you're getting a little bit less Cooper Flagg or a little bit less Tyrese Proctor, maybe a little bit. As much as I think Gangba has looked good in his minutes, I don't think he's been better than a Malawach or a Malik Brown. And I want those guys to play as many minutes as possible. And I would want Coach Shire to figure out can he? And again, this is a little bit tough based off Malik Brown's shooting, but I think Malawach can do it. Is can we find a couple minutes a game to get Brown and Malawach out there together? Because I just think the more Malik Brown minutes we can get, the better this team is. And maybe we can do that with Isaiah Evans in the games. You kind of mask some of his defensive. They're not really even issues. He's just not quite as good as some of the other guys. He's just fine. But you have that size, but then Evans shooting kind of makes up for some of the deficiency shooting from Malik Brown. And so I just think, sometimes you just want to have more of your favorite candies. And so that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
I'm gonna stay with it's Halloween, and there's all kinds of candy that's in my bag after going trick or treating. This team has got so many different players, but eventually it gets pared down, and you do get confident in your 8 players, sometimes even 7, when it's a very tough game. Because we know early on, we saw the minutes, like Cooper Flagg will get 38, 39 minutes, and he was giving K2 37 minutes. So there's no question that could be part of it as he tries to sort things out, though I don't think it's other than Cooper Flagg, who is just a highlight reel. What were the stats you were giving me? You don't have to go, but it was like every category.
He is
almost
points, assists, rebounds, steals, and blocks. He is top 10 in 4 of the 5 of those categories in the ACC, and he is top 12 in assists, so just outside the top 10. It is remarkable how well-rounded his game is. His shooting efficiency certainly isn't there right now. He is turning the ball over a little bit. I'm kind of nitpicking, really, because to your point, he's been far and away the best player on this team, and this is the last episode where I can say he is still 17 years old, because he will turn 18, I believe, this Saturday. So as long as I have that right, that'll be the last. This is the last time, I should say, that I can say he's still 17. But to your point from earlier in terms of Darren Harris and Gangba potentially getting minutes, I think they will get opportunities. It's just a matter of when. Because whether it's foul trouble or an injury, and with Duke basketball the past handful of years, it's inevitable. Somebody will go down. Knock on wood, I hope nobody goes down. But that's just been the track record of this team. That they'll have an opportunity, and it'll be what can they do with it when that happens. And I guess, play devil's advocate, there is also the possibility that Coach Scheyer just shortens the rotation if that were to happen, rather than giving the opportunity to Harris or Gangba. But I think if it's Brown or Malawach, he won't have a choice, because he's going to need to have 2 centers. If it's one of the wing players, he might shorten the rotation.
So in the beginning, the starting backcourt, Proctor. So you haven't spoken about Proctor really yet. What do you expect of Tyrese from this game?
So one of the interesting things for me is, who does Coach Scheyer have Proctor guard? Because one of the things, what maybe, this is a little bit of a tangent, but one of the reasons maybe we haven't been shooting the ball so well as of late is because, and this is a big excuse I'm going to give our guys, is maybe their legs aren't quite there because they're competing so hard defensively. And with that being said, Tyrese Proctor has been taking the hardest defensive matchup, and he's been our best three-point shooter. So I think that excuse doesn't hold much water, but I said it anyways. So the question is, who does Proctor guard? And it's either going to be Lance Terry, who's the leading scorer for Georgia Tech, or Nate George, who's their leading assist man. And it just comes down to, what do you want to take away more? The 3-point shooting or the ability to generate open looks for other people? My guess is he will be guarding Lance Terry, who's their best scorer, and they will try to make other people make shots, because Proctor does a really good job of limiting whoever he's guarding. We've seen this multiple times against RJ Davis. We saw him do it against LJ Cryer. He's just a really good defensive guard. And so I think he'll be on Lance Terry, which means that Sion James will probably draw the Nate George assignment.
So we weren't the only ones calling for Sion James to start. And initially it looked like Caleb Foster was really fitting nicely into that role. The last game or so, I didn't feel like he was as comfortable on the court. So any thoughts on Caleb Foster?
I agree with your assessment. First 2 games, he seemed to really respond well. Last 2 games, not as well. Albeit in the last 2 games, the team overall didn't play very well. But with that being said, in the Louisville game, up until the final 10 minutes, the team didn't play very well. But Caleb Foster had a really good first half. The only thing I'm curious about coming into this game is what I talked about in the post game, that he had a weird play on a fast break where he tried to stop and kind of fell. And then he was taken out and he was talking with the trainer, and that was the end of his game. So I'm just curious. I don't think he's really hurt. I think he'll play, but I'm just curious, if something happened there, because from what we found out during the summer, Caleb Foster played the majority of last year with an injury until it got really bad in the Wake Forest game. So that's, the one concern is he playing with something, right? So that's what I would say about Foster.
I'll only add to that. I think that's a really good assessment. The only thing I'll add to Caleb is that they managed to find him wide open for threes. And sometimes he's set and ready to go. Not quite like Isaiah, but it's a very comfortable looking shot. And then the other thing is he does have a really good drive to the basket. And he's probably the most explosive drive to the basket. Let's leave Coop out of this for a minute, because that's just whole different level.
I would say Foster is I agree with your first assessment. He's certainly our best guard at getting to the basket. I think what you just alluded to, he's got a good, his 3-point shot looks good, and he can get to the basket. I think that's what frustrates us Duke fans so much, is that we've seen glimpses, and sometimes much more than glimpses, of how good he can be. It's just his problems are all up here. And can he piece it, from the neck up? Can he piece it together consistently? And he may be one of those guys where it just takes him a couple of years to figure it out. But I think at some point he will. He's got all the pieces to figure it out.
Well, and before you wrap it up, I think he may be one of the Duke players that Coach Shirer's referring to. Loosen up, have a little fun out there, take your shot, drive. Collectively, our defense is fantastic. So don't worry as much. 9 for 33. Worry a little more than 9 for 33 in the first half against George Mason. But loosen up, because I think he's also specifically talking about K2. Because K2's got good looks, and he's banging it off the back of the rim. And that usually is when you're tense or you hurry the shot. And so, but I think it's time to wrap it up there, Jack.
Yeah, and I think you were spot on. I think Caleb Foster is certainly the second guy. And probably the third guy is Mason Gillis,
Mason Gillis
has not been shooting great, and that's the thing. All three of those guys, we don't necessarily know it with Kahn at the college level, but Mason Gillis has a track record. Caleb Foster shot 40% last year as a freshman, and we believe Kahn Knippel can be a good three-point shooter. So I think you're spot on. Thanks for bringing up Caleb at the end as a guy who's probably pressing too much, and was one of the guys that Coach Shires was speaking to. So with that being said, we'll see you guys probably around 2 o'clock Eastern time, maybe 2:15. After the Georgia Tech game. So be sure to tune in for the post-game show. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. Please like this video. It helps us grow. Leave a comment below. We'll be sure to respond to you. And we'll see you guys on Saturday. Peace.